Welcome to Eternal Light, a place that connects values. Today, we will journey with you to discover God's promise of a new season in your life through the signs that you may have overlooked. Have you ever felt like life is pushing you into an unexpected turn? The familiar things start to feel out of place, old doors slam shut before your eyes, and uncertainty invades your soul, even though you can't explain why. You find yourself asking, what's happening? But what you may not realize is that this could be a sign that God is preparing you for something greater. God never abruptly changes the course of your life without preparation. He is a God of order, and He always sends signs ahead of time when a new season is about to arrive. These signs could come as losses, sudden changes, or even challenges that seem impossible to overcome. But if you look through spiritual eyes, you will see that each of these is just a part of His bigger plan for you. Let's explore the signs that God may be using to tell you that something great is about to happen in your life. Stay tuned until the end of the video because there is much more that will awaken your spirit. Here's your English text, exactly as requested. Part 1. The feeling of restlessness, dissatisfaction with the present. There are moments in life when we suddenly realize that the things that once brought us joy are no longer enough. The job that once excited us now feels monotonous, the relationships that used to be filled with warmth seem distant, and even the dreams that once burned brightly within us begin to lose their spark. It's an unsettling feeling, as if you are caught between two worlds, one that you no longer belong to and another that you have yet to see. However, if you pause and listen, you might realize that this is not ordinary dissatisfaction, but rather a calling, an invitation, a sign from God that He is preparing you for something new. The invisible calling. Abraham might have felt the same way when God spoke to him. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. Imagine Abraham standing in the desert, gazing at the distant horizon. He had no idea what lay ahead. There was no map, no detailed instructions, only a promise from the one he trusted. But the stirring in his heart, the sense that he no longer belonged to where he had been, was enough to push him forward. God never calls someone without first awakening a longing within them. He does not simply command, go. He plants within them a feeling that something greater is waiting. It is not mere dissatisfaction. It is a spiritual sign, a preparation for a new season. You might be experiencing something similar. Maybe you were once content where you were, but now, no matter how much you try, you still feel like something is missing. It feels as if your soul is being pulled in a different direction, even though you cannot yet put it into words. That is a sign when God shakes your comfort zone. God does not call you into something new without first shaking your comfort zone. Look at the life of Moses. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, having everything anyone could dream of: power, prestige, wealth, yet something inside him would not let him rest. One day, when he witnessed a Hebrew being mistreated, he could not look away. He acted, and as a result, he was forced to flee into the wilderness. At first glance, it seemed like Moses had lost everything. But in reality, this was the moment when God was preparing him for something greater. Had Moses remained in the palace, he might never have become the leader who led Israel out of Egypt. But the unrest in his heart, the dissatisfaction with his old life, was the first step towards stepping into God's plan. Similarly, when you no longer feel fulfilled in the present, it may be that God is preparing you for something greater. He does not want you to remain in the same familiar cycle forever. He wants you to rise to a new level in your faith journey. How to recognize God's calling. 1. You feel an urge to change but cannot explain why. You may not fully understand what is happening, but you know you no longer belong where you are. The things that once satisfied you no longer bring joy. Your job, relationships, or even your previous goals no longer feel fulfilling. 3. You feel drawn towards something bigger. It could be a dream you never pursued, a mission you never considered, or a goal you once feared. 4. You feel God speaking to you through prayer. When you pray, there's a sense of confirmation in your heart that you need to step forward. Prayer, the key to seeing the next step. In seasons of transition, prayer is the key. If you are uncertain about what is happening, do not rush into action. Instead, come to God in prayer. Consider the life of Jesus. Before stepping into his public ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, fasting and praying. He knew a new season was coming, and he prepared for it by seeking the Father. If you feel restless, if you are no longer satisfied with the present, take time to pray. Ask God, Lord, are you calling me into something new? What must I let go of to walk in your plan? Give me wisdom to see what you are doing. God always answers those who seek him sincerely. He may not give you a detailed roadmap, but he will place peace in your heart that surpasses all understanding. Walking in faith. Restlessness is not always comfortable. It can make you feel anxious, uncertain, even fearful. But if it is from God, then it is a gift. It is his way of urging you forward, his way of reminding you that you were born to do more than what you are doing now. Remember, Abraham did not know what lay ahead when he left his homeland. Moses could not have imagined he would become the leader of a nation, but they stepped forward. They trusted in God's plan. Today, if you feel unsettled in your current situation, do not panic. Pray, seek God, and be ready. A new season is coming. And if you dare to step forward, you will see that God has prepared the way long before you even realized you needed to walk it. When old doors close. There are moments in life when you realize that the world around you is changing beyond your control. A door in which you had placed so much hope suddenly slams shut, without warning, without explanation. A job opportunity you worked tirelessly for slips through your fingers at the last moment. A meaningful relationship you thought would last forever is now just a collection of memories. The things you were once so certain of, the paths you once walked confidently, all seem to be fading away, leaving you with a sense of emptiness and uncertainty. In times like these, you may find yourself asking, God, why did you let this happen? But what you may not yet realize is that perhaps God did not close that door to hurt you. Maybe he closed it because he is preparing to open another door, one that is greater, better, and more significant in his plan for your life. A sign of direction. When the brook Cherith dried up, the prophet Elijah might have been confused. This brook had been the source of water that God provided for him during the drought, but now it was gone. He might have wondered, God, if you gave me this brook, why did you let it dry up? If this is where you wanted me to be, why are things changing? What Elijah did not know was that God had already prepared another way. He wasn't abandoning Elijah. He was leading him into a new season. Soon after, God instructed Elijah to go to Zarephath, where a widow would provide for him. You see, sometimes God closes a door not to reject you, but to redirect you to where you truly belong. He knows that if you stay too long in the old place, you will never step into the greater purpose he has set for you. Maybe right now, you are standing in front of a closed door feeling lost. But remember this, a closed door is not the end. It is simply a redirection. Why does God close doors? Have you ever considered that a closed door might actually be God's way of protecting you? 1. To protect you from something that isn't good for you. Sometimes you desire something so much, but God sees the hidden dangers that you cannot perceive. Just like a child who insists on touching fire without understanding that it burns, we often chase after things without seeing the full picture. 2. To prepare you for something better. You may be praying for God to keep you in a certain job, but he has a greater opportunity waiting ahead. You may not see it right now, but trust that he is working behind the scenes. 3. To strengthen your faith. If every door opened easily, you would never need faith. But when a door closes, you are compelled to seek God, to pray, and to trust that he is guiding you even when you don't understand. Holding on to faith when doors close. Facing a closed door is not easy. It can leave you feeling anxious, afraid, and even doubtful. But this is the very moment when you need to pray more fervently than ever. Look at the life of Joseph. A door closed when he was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. Another door closed when he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Each time a door closed, it seemed as if Joseph was moving further away from his dreams. But in reality, those closed doors were leading him exactly where God wanted him to be. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would have never reached Egypt. If he had never been imprisoned, he would have never met the cupbearer who eventually introduced him to Pharaoh. And without all those closed doors, he would have never risen to become the second most powerful man in Egypt. Maybe right now you are in the middle of a journey like Joseph's. You don't understand why things are happening the way they are. But remember this, the closed door today might just be the preparation for something great tomorrow. What should you do when a door closes? 1. Do not panic. Pray instead. When you lose a job, when a relationship ends, when an opportunity disappears, pause and pray. Seek God's will and ask for His guidance. 2. Look for God's signs. Maybe God is opening another door that you haven't noticed yet. Pay attention to new opportunities that arise. 3. Remember God's faithfulness in the past. How has He led you before? How has He made a way for you in the past? If He did it once, He will do it again. Keep walking in faith. Even when you cannot see the full path ahead, take the next step. God will illuminate your way one step at a time. When one door closes, another is opening. If you're standing in front of a closed door today, know that you are not alone. God sees what you're going through. He sees your tears. He understands your frustration, but He also knows that something greater is waiting ahead. You don't have to understand everything right now. You just need to trust. You just need to hold on to your faith. And you just need to remember this. When one door closes, it is not the end. It is simply a redirection toward the greater purpose God has prepared for you. Increased opposition and spiritual testing. Darkness is always thickest right before dawn. This is a law not only in nature, but also in the spiritual realm. When a new season is approaching, when God is preparing to take you into something greater, you cannot avoid challenges. And sometimes those challenges come in waves, overwhelming, relentless, making you wonder, why is everything becoming so difficult? But pause for a moment. Think about it. The enemy never wastes time attacking those without potential. If you are facing opposition, if it feels like the whole world is against you, it might be a sign that you are on the verge of a spiritual breakthrough. Look at the lives of those who came before you, those chosen by God to do great things. You will see a clear pattern. Opposition always increases right before victory comes. When you stand at the threshold of a breakthrough. Nehemiah was not a warrior. He was not a prophet. He was just a cupbearer, a servant in the Persian king's palace. But God placed a burden in his heart to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, restoring the faith and honor of God's people. The moment Nehemiah set out to do this work, opposition arose. His enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, did not just mock and ridicule him, but also plotted to destroy the project. They mocked, even a fox running on that wall would make it collapse. They conspired to attack. They gathered troops, threatening to use force to bring the wall down. They tried to discourage Nehemiah. They sent false letters, spread misleading rumors, hoping he would give up. But what did Nehemiah do? He prayed, he stood firm, and he continued the work God had given him. Neither he nor the builders stopped, even as the pressure increased. They worked with one hand while holding weapons with the other. And in just 52 days, something that seemed impossible became reality. The wall was completed. You see, if Nehemiah had given up at the first sign of opposition, that work would never have been finished. But because he persevered, because he refused to let opposition discourage him, he witnessed God's miracle. So when you face difficulties, ask yourself, could this be a sign that I am getting close to a breakthrough? When your faith is tested, no one in the Bible was called by God without facing trials. Moses had to endure doubt from his own people before he could lead them out of Egypt. David was hunted by King Saul like a fugitive before he could sit on the throne. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den before he became a powerful advisor in the kingdom. Jesus faced opposition from religious leaders and was ultimately crucified, but that very cross became the path to salvation for all humanity. Now imagine, what if they had given up? If Moses had told God, I can't do this, choose someone else, the Israelites might never have been delivered. If David had said, it's not fair that I'm treated this way, I give up, he would never have become the king God had chosen. If Daniel had compromised and abandoned his faith, he might have survived, but the miracle in the lion's den would never have happened. And if Jesus had decided that the cross was too painful, humanity would have remained captive to sin forever. What about you? If you give up now, you will never know what God has waiting for you. Prayer, the most powerful weapon. Nehemiah did not fight Sanballat and Tobiah with weapons or cunning plans. He prayed. When mocked, he prayed. When threatened, he prayed. When feeling weak, he prayed. He did not let circumstances dictate his destiny. He let God decide. What about you? When you face trials, what will you do? Will you lose heart and give up? Or will you pray, stand firm, and keep moving forward? Remember this: opposition is not a sign of failure. It is proof that you are getting closer to the destiny God has planned for you. Lessons we can learn. 1. Trials are a part of the faith journey. If you have never been tested, perhaps you have not yet truly stepped into God's plan. 2. Opposition is not a sign you are on the wrong path. Sometimes it is evidence that you are on the right one. Prayer is your most powerful weapon. As son, do not fight in your own strength. Give it to God. 4. Persevere. You will never know what incredible things lie ahead if you give up too soon. When challenges increase, don't give up. You might be in a battle right now. You might feel tired, discouraged, even ready to quit. But remember, everything great in God's kingdom must go through testing before it is accomplished. If you are facing opposition, if it feels like everything is against you, do not be afraid. Do not give up. Remember, the storm is just a sign that the harvest is coming. Stand firm, pray, keep moving forward, because perhaps just one more step, and you will reach what God has been preparing for you since eternity. Part 4. Being isolated or separated from the familiar. There is something strange that happens when God prepares someone for something great. They are often set apart. Imagine standing before a vast forest. Around you are familiar trails, well-trodden paths where many have walked before. But then a strong wind blows. An invisible force pulls you away from what is familiar, pushing you onto a path you have never set foot on. At first, you may panic. You feel lost, left behind with no one beside you. But remember this: isolation is not abandonment, it is preparation. Look at the people whom God used mightily in the Bible. Before he lifted them up, he placed them in a period of separation, when isolation is not punishment, but training. Think about Joseph, a young man who was the pride of his father, who had great dreams of a glorious future. But what happened? He was hated by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. Joseph might have thought that God had abandoned him, but in reality, God was training him. In the darkness of the prison, Joseph learned to rely on God, to manage resources, and to interpret dreams. And at the right time, God pulled him out of isolation and placed him in the position of the prime minister of Egypt. You see, if Joseph had not been separated from his family, if he had not gone through those years of trials, he would never have been ready to take on such a great role. The same happened with Moses. 40 years in Pharaoh's palace did not prepare him to lead Israel, but 40 years in the wilderness did. From prince to shepherd. Moses was once a prince, but one event changed everything. He killed an Egyptian soldier, was found out, and was forced to flee into the desert. From living in a palace, he became an unknown shepherd. Those years of solitude were not meaningless. In isolation, Moses learned humility, learned to wait on God, and learned to lead a flock, a skill that would be crucial when he later led the Israelites. Sometimes God needs to pull you away from the familiar to prepare you for something greater. Isolation, a test of faith. When you are isolated, you no longer have the validation of others. No more applause, no more encouragement. It is just you and God. David was in the wilderness with his sheep before he faced Goliath. Elijah was by the brook of Cherith before he confronted the prophets of Baal. John the Baptist lived in the desert before he stepped out to call people to repentance. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness before beginning his ministry. Do you see the pattern? These people had to go through a season of isolation before God used them. Maybe you are in such a season right now. Maybe you feel lost, as if you have been forgotten. But remember this, God never forgets those he is preparing. When God closes a door, he is preparing another one. Have you ever experienced being pushed out of something familiar? A job, a relationship, a community you once loved? You may think that you did something wrong, but sometimes God has to close one door to push you toward where you are meant to be. Look at Elijah. He relied on the brook of Cherith for water and on ravens for food. But then the brook dried up. Elijah might have panicked, but God had already prepared a widow in Zarephath to provide for him. Can you believe that your current isolation is just a stepping stone for God to bring you to a better place? Prayer, the key to overcoming isolation. During isolation, you will face many doubts. You may feel as though God is silent. But never forget this. God's silence does not mean he is not working. When you cannot hear God, that is when you need to pray more than ever. Joseph likely prayed in prison. Moses surely prayed in the wilderness. David wrote many psalms during the days he was running from Saul. Prayer not only helps you endure isolation, but it also turns isolation into a season of strength. Things to remember when facing isolation. 1. You are not forgotten. If God is keeping you in a certain place, it is because he is preparing you. 2. Do not resist the season of isolation. Learn from it. Allow God to shape you during this time. 3. Prayer is the key. Isolation is not the time to doubt God, but to draw closer to him. 4. Believe that something great is coming. If God has set you apart, it is because he is preparing something greater for you. Conclusion. Isolation is not the end, but the beginning. Joseph seemed forgotten in prison, but in reality, he was only waiting for the day God would pull him out and place him in the position he was meant for. Moses may have thought his life was over in the wilderness, but in truth, God was preparing him for a great journey. What about you? If you are in a season of isolation, remember that this is not the end. It is just preparation. Pray, trust, believe that something great is coming. Part 5, Sudden Changes and Supernatural Acceleration. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything changed in the blink of an eye? A door that seemed permanently shut suddenly swung open, an impossible situation unexpectedly turned around, and the things you had been waiting for years suddenly became reality in an instant. That is not a coincidence. It is the supernatural acceleration of God. We often have a limited perspective on time. We believe that everything requires a slow, methodical process, a clear plan, and years of effort to reach a goal. But when God decides to act, he is not bound by time. What seems to take a lifetime can change in a single day. Joseph, from prison to the palace in a single day. Look at the life of Joseph, a young man with great dreams, yet he spent years in darkness, imprisoned and forgotten. 13 years of trials, betrayed, abandoned, misunderstood. There must have been times when Joseph thought his fate was sealed. Day after day, he woke up to the same prison walls, the same hopeless reality. But then, in just one day, everything changed. In the morning, Joseph woke up as a prisoner. By noon, he was standing before Pharaoh. By evening, he became the prime minister of Egypt. A sudden shift, no warning signs, no time to prepare. Everything happened so fast that Joseph himself might not have believed it. What caused this transformation? Joseph's faithfulness and God's acceleration. He did not allow the prison to kill the dreams in his heart. Even in isolation, he remained faithful. He continued to pray, and at the appointed time, God changed his destiny in an instant. Can this happen to you? Yes. And when God does it, you won't even have time to process it. God's acceleration is not dependent on human effort. One of the most powerful examples of supernatural acceleration is found in the life of David. From an unknown shepherd boy to a national hero after just one battle. In the morning, he was just an ordinary, nameless boy. By the afternoon, he had defeated Goliath. A few hours later, all of Israel was shouting his name. God does not need decades to take you where he wants you to be. He only needs a moment. The question is, Are you ready to receive that shift? When God pushes you faster than you expect. Imagine riding a horse-drawn carriage at a steady pace. You are comfortable with the speed, you know the route, and you have an idea of how long it will take to reach your destination. But suddenly, someone cracks a whip. The horses surge forward, you panic. The scenery around you becomes a blur, everything seems to spin. You feel out of control. That is what supernatural acceleration feels like. You may have planned your life like this. It will take me 5 years to build my career. I will need 10 years to have a stable family. I need 3 years to achieve this goal. But suddenly, God speeds everything up. A single phone call changes everything. A door you never expected to open suddenly swings wide. An opportunity that seemed impossible appears out of nowhere. God is not limited by your timeline. He can accomplish in one day what would take a lifetime for man to achieve. Do not fear. When everything changes suddenly, when God accelerates things, it can feel overwhelming. That is a natural reaction. But do not let fear hold you back. If Joseph had been afraid and refused to leave the prison, he would have missed his destiny as prime minister. If David had hesitated and not faced Goliath, he would have remained just a shepherd boy. God does not just change your circumstances, He changes you. He does not just accelerate opportunities, He accelerates your faith. When acceleration happens, pray. The only thing that will keep you steady when God changes everything suddenly is prayer. You cannot control God's speed, but you can control how you respond. Pray for wisdom as you step into new doors. Pray for peace when everything moves too fast. Pray for your faith to be stronger than your doubts. Be ready when God moves. The things you thought would take a lifetime, God can do in a single day. Do you believe that God can change your life today? Be ready. Stay faithful even when you see no signs, because when God's timing arrives, you will not be able to stop His acceleration. One day, you will look back and realize everything changed in the blink of an eye. Part 6. Unexpected provision. When life takes you to a place you never expected, what happens next? Do you feel fear? Do you wonder if you have what it takes to keep going? Or can you trust that God has already set up provision for you, even when you don't see it yet? We often have a specific idea of how provision should come: a stable job, a savings account, a carefully planned career path. But when God steps into your story, He doesn't follow human rules. He is not limited by what makes sense to you. He is not bound by earthly resources. If you find yourself in a situation where everything seems to be falling apart, remember this: God will never leave you lacking, but His provision may come from sources you never expected. Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, when God provides from an unlikely place. Imagine a weary man wandering in hunger and thirst amid a devastating famine. This was Elijah, the great prophet of God who had witnessed extraordinary miracles. But now he found himself in a desperate situation. The brook Cherith had dried up. To an ordinary person, this might seem like the end. How could he survive without water? But God had already prepared provision from a source no one would have guessed, not from a wealthy noble, not from a merchant with stored up food, but from a poor widow. That doesn't seem logical, does it? A woman without a husband, living in poverty, with only a handful of flour and a little oil, left to bake a final meal for herself and her son before starving to death. That was not the place a prophet would expect to find provision. But God does not need human resources to perform miracles. He only needs faith. What did Elijah do? He didn't complain. He didn't argue with God, saying, "Lord, this widow is poorer than I am. How can she help me when she is struggling herself?" No, Elijah trusted. And the miracle happened. The jar of flour never ran out. The jug of oil never ran dry. A widow who seemingly had nothing became the channel of provision for one of the greatest prophets in history. What can you learn from this? Don't limit the ways God can provide for you. Don't overlook small doors just because you are waiting for a bigger one. Don't underestimate a miracle just because it doesn't come the way you expected. When God's provision comes from unexpected places. Have you ever wondered why God chooses such unusual sources of provision? Why didn't He send Elijah to a wealthy king? Why didn't He lead him to a hidden supply of food? Why use a poor widow? Because God wants to teach us that provision does not come from circumstances, it comes from Him. God wants you to know that resources are not as important as the hand of the provider. If your trust is in your bank account, your job, or your connections, you are putting your faith in the wrong place. When God provides, He does it in a way that makes it clear it was Him. Do you remember the Israelites? They had no farms, but manna fell from heaven. They had no water, but God made water flow from a rock. They had no powerful weapons, but God defeated their enemies for them. God doesn't need a natural path to get you where He wants you to be. He can create a way where there is none. Are you in a place where you can't provide for yourself? Maybe you're in a situation where you don't know how to move forward. Maybe you just lost your job. Maybe you are facing a financial crisis. Maybe you can't see any possible way out, and you're wondering, how can God help me? Remember this: God's provision is not dependent on the economy. God's provision is not dependent on people. God's provision is not limited by what you see. Elijah didn't see provision until he walked in faith. He didn't see the flour multiply before asking the widow to bake a cake. He didn't see the oil overflow before obeying God's command. You too must take a step of faith before you see the miracle happen. Let faith lead you. Maybe you don't know what you're going to do tomorrow, but today you can pray and trust that God has already prepared a source of provision for you. Don't focus on your circumstances. Focus on God. Don't limit His miracles. Let Him work in His own way. Don't worry about what you can't see. Trust in what you know. God is your provider. If you're waiting for a miracle, remember, God is never late. He may have already arranged your provision in a place you never considered. Maybe the door you're knocking on is not the one He wants to open. Maybe the resource you're waiting for is not the one He has prepared. Maybe the miracle you need will come from somewhere you never expected. Trust, even when you can't see. Remember this: Elijah didn't know about the widow of Zarephath until he got there. You too cannot see the full plan of God, but if you trust Him, you will find provision in places you never imagined. God will never leave you lacking. He will always provide in His own way.